Today, we're going to solve a historical puzzle. It's about one of America's most essential, yet somehow least understood, founding fathers, Jacob Broom of Delaware. And really, the first piece of this whole puzzle is just figuring out who he actually was. So, who was Jacob Broom? It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But if you go looking for an answer, you're going to find yourself tangled up in this web of historical confusion pretty fast. Different sources often point to completely different men, which has created a real identity crisis for this particular founder. And here's the root of the problem. There were two of them. Two pretty prominent politicians named Jacob Broom from the exact same family, just active in different eras. So on the left, you've got our guy, the founding father, and on the right, that's his grandson, who also became a politician. This, right here, is the core of the Jacob Broom problem. Okay, so first things first, let's untangle these two identities. Getting this straight is absolutely the key to understanding everything else about the man who helped create the United States. This chart lays it all out pretty clearly. The man we're talking about is Jacob Broom, the founder, born in 1752, a signer of the U.S. Constitution from Delaware. His grandson, who was born almost 60 years later, became a U.S. congressman, but for Pennsylvania. See? Two different men, two totally different legacies. All right, so now that we've identified our Jacob Broom, we hit the next major point of confusion. What exactly did he sign? Because, well, history sometimes gets this one wrong too. You might even find a source that makes a really bold claim, something like this one. It sounds authoritative, doesn't it? It puts him right there in the room back in 1776, signing that iconic document. But yeah, if you dig just a little bit deeper, the historical record tells a very, very different and much more accurate story. The truth is, Jacob Broom's big moment wasn't in 1776. It was 11 years later in 1787. He was one of Delaware's 5 delegates to the Constitutional Convention. And get this, he attended every single session and was right there to sign the final U.S. Constitution. So he was absolutely a nation builder, just not for the documents some people mistakenly remember.
Okay, so we know who he was and we know what he signed. But here's another twist in the puzzle. What did he actually look like?
And this is pretty astonishing. For a man who signed the Constitution, no authentic period portrait of Jacob Broom exists. He is, in a very real sense, a faceless founder. Even in those famous paintings of the signing, his face is deliberately obscured because the artist literally had no reference to work from. But what we lack in a physical portrait, we kind of make up for with this wonderful character sketch from his fellow delegate, William Pierce. It paints a picture not of his face, but of his personality. He was a steady, cheerful, and approachable guy, not some showy politician. So, now that we've cleared up some of the myths, let's take a look at the life of this plain good man. Who was the real Jacob Broom? Before he was ever a founder, Broom was deeply rooted in his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware. He was the son of a blacksmith, and he became a prosperous businessman and surveyor who really dedicated himself to public service. He held nearly every important local office. He was basically the mayor multiple times. And while his pacifist leanings kept him off the battlefield, he was a true patriot, using his surveying skills to draw these crucial maps for General Washington. Now, at the Constitutional Convention, Broom was this quiet but incredibly steadfast contributor. He consistently voted for a strong central government, which he thought was essential for a small state like Delaware. He wasn't the guy giving grand speeches, but his reliable vote was critical for keeping his delegation united. He even had some pretty interesting ideas, like a lifetime term for the president and a 9-year term for senators. After the convention, Broom was an innovator and an entrepreneur. He built one of Delaware's very first cotton mills, but after a fire, he sold the property in 1802 to a man named E.I. DuPont. And that very piece of land, well, it would become the foundation of the legendary DuPont Company empire. Beyond his public and business life, we get this rare glimpse into his private values from a letter he wrote to his son who was away at Princeton. It's just a simple, direct plea from a father, reminding his son of what he felt was most important in life. It really shows a man guided by a deep personal faith. So, after solving all these puzzles and uncovering the real story, what's the big takeaway here? Why does a quiet founder like Jacob Broom still matter to us today?
Well, his story is just this powerful reminder that history isn't only made by the loudest voices or the most famous faces. The United States was built just as much by steady, reliable, dedicated citizens like Jacob Broom, men who showed up every day, did the work, and put the good of their community and their country first. He was a steady hand, right when one was needed most. And that leaves us with a final thought. Jacob Broom was one of the faceless founders. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other quiet contributors and unsung heroes are out there, in history and even in our own lives today, building the world we know without ever needing the credit or the spotlight?